in line with the sagittal suture of the skull. We could call that a movement in a sagittal plane. It must be going around an axis at right angles to that, which would be in line with the frontal or coronal suture. So we talk about movement through a sagittal plane around a coronal axis. Similarly, abduction would be a coronal plane movement around a sagittal axis. And then, of course, horizontal movements around a vertical axis. Now, just reviewing that, because I know from my own point of view, many years ago, this kind of confused me, and people would leap into explanations using these terms, and I still wasn't quite familiar. So, any problems with that? I think that's something you just have to try and learn. I know for people with spatial problems or dimensional problems, these terms throw them off balance. But don't let it throw you off balance. If you're losing what I'm saying, then either during the class or afterwards, ask me to go through it again. Okay, so in space, there are potentially 3 dimensions through which we can move. Only 3. And each of these dimensions is called, when it's performed voluntarily, it's called a freedom of movement. So with a glenohumeral joint, I can produce movement through a sagittal plane, through a coronal plane, through a horizontal plane. So I can move through 3 degrees of freedom at this joint. Some of the articles you read on the spine talk about 6 degrees of freedom, which is interesting, because the 4th dimension, of course, is time. I'm not quite sure what the 5th and 6th are, but it explains why people are having so much trouble understanding the spine. To be a degree of freedom of movement, it must have an axis. Planar movements are not considered freedoms of motion. Okay? And interestingly enough, Punjabi, who's done a hell of a lot of really good work on the spine, uses these terms 6 degrees. It's very naughty because he is a biomechanic. That's his origin, and he should know better than to use that term. But anyway, it's a term McConnell has used in its strictest definition. So using these terms, we can start to define types of movement. If we imagine a point, where's my point gone? On the articulating surface of a bone, let's imagine this is the head of the humerus, and as it moves, it inscribes a straight line on its female surface. Then, if that is a straight line, we call that a pure swing. That's the movement. Don't ask me why, it's just a term that's been given. A pure swing. So how many pure swings are there in the glenohumeral joint? Without looking at your notes. How many movements will produce this gliding?
2.
What are they?
Internal, external rotation, abduction, flexion.
Good.
Abduction.
Abduction and flexion. Okay. Internal and external rotation, that's good. That will produce this kind of motion. So we get a horizontal line within the joint. What is this movement? Ab and adduction. So those would be the 2 swings in the joint. If we get a movement and this does not move, and the movement is occurring around this point, we call that a spin. And the point, the line through which that is going through that point is called the joint's mechanical axis. Now, you can catch up on all these other definitions. The main thing is to appreciate that these are quite different. This one has no gliding in it. And if it has no gliding in it, we can't mobilize it. Not as a glide, anyway. This one has a swing in it, external and internal rotation. So if we lose that, we know that we will assist in regaining it if we can produce the glide. But we can't do it with a spin.